The dam is breaking. For decades, the Western world marched in lockstep, held together by a fragile and increasingly frayed consensus, a consensus dictated from Washington and Tel Aviv. But the facade has finally shattered. In a stunning, coordinated sequence that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago, the old pillars of the Western Alliance are beginning to revolt. First, it was France. Then, the United Kingdom, America's special partner. And now, Canada, our neighbor. One by one, these G7 powers have announced their intention to officially recognize a Palestinian state. This is not a trivial diplomatic maneuver. It is a seismic shift. It is a historic, global rebellion against a brutal project of conquest that the world can no longer stomach. But as the world turns, as our oldest allies choose a path of conscience, the President of the United States has made his role terrifyingly and unambiguously clear. He is not a neutral arbiter. He is not a peacemaker. He is not the leader of the free world. He is the enforcer. Last night, in the dead of night, like a thief, after Canada made its sovereign decision to join this global rebellion, Donald Trump took to his social media platform. With the fate of the entire North American economy, a critical trade deal affecting hundreds of billions of dollars and millions of jobs, hanging in the balance, he delivered a chilling ultimatum. He declared that because Canada dared to recognize Palestine, a trade deal would now be, in his words, very hard to make. Shortly thereafter, a new 10% tariff was announced, a declaration of economic war on the Canadian people. Stop and comprehend the profound, world-altering gravity of this act. What does the symbolic recognition of a Palestinian state, an act of diplomacy on the other side of the planet, have to do with the trade of steel, aluminum, and auto parts between two of the most integrated economies on Earth? The answer is nothing. And everything. Donald Trump is now openly, proudly, and shamelessly weaponizing the full might of the American economy, your job, your business, your cost of living, to brutally punish one of our closest and most steadfast allies. And for what? For making a simple diplomatic gesture that displeased the radical, ethno-supremacist government of Israel. This is the moment the mask has finally come off. This is the moment we must move beyond the childish, day-to-day spectacle of partisan politics and confront the terrifying reality of our situation. This is not about a trade dispute. This is not about Trump's temper. This is about a multi-decade grand strategy, a vast and ambitious imperial project that is now reaching its final, bloody, and desperate phase. And the President of the United States is its greatest champion, its most loyal soldier, its most ruthless enforcer. To understand why Donald Trump is willing to ignite a trade war with Canada, we must first understand the operation he is protecting. We must peel back the layers of propaganda and look directly at the horrifying reality of the Gaza endgame. The official narrative, repeated endlessly by media pundits and craven politicians, is that this is a war of self-defense, a reluctant but necessary campaign to destroy Hamas. This is a lie. What is happening in Gaza is not a war. It is a meticulously planned, multi-stage operation of conquest, ethnic cleansing, and annexation. And the first step in that operation was the manufacturing of a phony ceasefire. Just weeks before Trump's inauguration, with the world watching in horror, his special envoy was dispatched to the Middle East to broker a deal. What emerged was a three-phase plan. Phase 1 was simple. Israel would pause its bombing campaign and make a partial withdrawal for 60 days. In exchange, Hamas would release a first tranche of 33 hostages. But the entire premise, the foundation upon which the world's hopes were built, was Phase 2, a permanent ceasefire, the full release of all remaining hostages, and the beginning of a genuine peace. Israel agreed to this framework. They gave their word. It was a cynical, calculated dissection from the very beginning. Israel never had any intention of honoring a permanent ceasefire. Their goal was purely tactical. They saw the 60-day pause not as a step towards peace, but as a strategic advantage. It was a chance to quiet the international outcry, to rearm their forces with a fresh supply of American bombs, to give their exhausted troops a breather, and crucially, to get a portion of their hostages back, just enough to quell the rising dissent from the hostages' families back home. During that entire 60-day period, Israel made zero genuine effort to negotiate the terms of Phase 2. They treated the idea of a permanent peace as a joke. Then, as the deadline approached, they moved the goalposts. They came back to the table and unilaterally changed the deal. Give us more hostages, they demanded, in exchange for another temporary pause. Darius. Hamas, and indeed the entire world, saw this for what it was, a bad faith hostage negotiation. They understood the brutal logic at play. For the Palestinians trapped in Gaza, those hostages are their only shield, their only leverage against total annihilation. To trade them all away piecemeal, for a few more weeks of a temporary pause here and there, would be an act of collective suicide. Because everyone, Hamas, Israel, and the American State Department, knows what happens the moment the last hostage is freed. The final restraint is removed, and the slaughter begins in earnest. So when Hamas refused to be played for a fool, Israel got the pretext it had been engineering all along. They feigned outrage, declared that Hamas had violated the deal, and they relaunched their offensive with a ferocity that has shocked the conscience of the world. The phony ceasefire had served its purpose. What has been unleashed upon the people of Gaza since that ceasefire collapsed in March is not a war. It is an industrial-scale slaughter. We must use statistics not to numb, but to awaken. The Gaza Strip is now, functionally, gone. 90% of its major roads have been obliterated. 70% of every structure, every home, every apartment building, every mosque, every market, has been turned to rubble. To simply clear the debris, to level the ground back to zero, would take an estimated 15 years. This is a level of industrial destruction that rivals the firebombing of Dresden and the atomic destruction of Hiroshima. And that is just the concrete. The human toll is a cataclysm. Out of a population of 2.1 million, it is now reasonably estimated that as many as 200,000 have been killed. That is 10% of the entire population, erased in less than 2 years. For those who are not killed by the bombs, a slower, more agonizing death awaits. Israel has weaponized starvation. They have maintained a complete blockade, cutting off food, water, medicine, and fuel. An American Green Beret, a veteran who worked for an Israeli-backed humanitarian organization on the ground, gave his eyewitness testimony. He described watching Israeli defense forces deliberately fire tank rounds into cars full of unarmed civilians fleeing aid sites. He described them firing artillery and mortar rounds directly into crowds of starving people who were simply trying to get a bag of flour for their children. Since the aid sites were established, over 1,100 Palestinians have been killed while trying to get food. And when confronted with this undeniable, televised reality, the skeletal children, the mass graves, the eyewitnesses, the Israeli propaganda machine and its puppets in America, like Charlie Kirk, deploy their final, despicable lie: Hamas is stealing the aid. Let us be absolutely clear. This is a fabrication, a blood libel against a starving people, and we have the proof. An internal U.S. government analysis, reported by both the New York Times and Reuters, examined 156 incidents of aid theft and found zero evidence that Hamas had systematically benefited. Senior Israeli military officials, speaking anonymously, admitted the same: they have never found proofs. The U.S. intelligence community has no reports to back up this claim. They are relying solely on the public lies of the Israeli government. So, we must ask, if Hamas is a defeated force, if its war machine is non-existent, and if it is not stealing the aid, then what is the true purpose of this campaign? The conclusion is as inescapable as it is horrifying. The goal is not to defeat an enemy. The goal is to make Gaza so unlivable, to create a literal hell on earth, a landscape of rubble and famine and disease, that its surviving population can be permanently and forcibly expelled. This is not a war against Hamas. This is a war against the Palestinian people. It is not self-defense. It is a calculated, systematic program of extermination and ethnic cleansing, designed to clear the land for Zionist conquest. And this is the operation that Donald Trump is now using the full economic power of the United States to protect. The industrialized slaughter in the Gaza Strip is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. It is the bloody, brutal, and necessary first step in a much larger, far more ambitious project. While the world's attention is deliberately focused on the horrifying details of the famine and the rubble, a much bigger game is being played. This is the grand strategy, a multi-decade plan to permanently redraw the map of the Middle East, erase the Palestinian nation from existence, and forge a new, undisputed Israeli empire. The frantic, coordinated rush by France, the UK, and Canada to recognize a Palestinian state is not a proactive move. It is a desperate, last-ditch defensive reaction. They are not trying to create a Palestinian state, they are trying to save the very possibility of one before it is extinguished forever. They can see what is happening. They are in a race against time, because Israel is now in a race to annex. The Israeli government, through its so-called General's Plan, is already implementing this conquest in plain sight. They have already carved out a massive buffer zone, annexing 17% of Gaza's territory. They have trisected the Strip, cutting it into disconnected cantons. And they are now openly threatening to begin formal annexation piece by piece. Their furious reaction to France's decision was the most revealing moment of all. They declared, for the world to hear, that they could never tolerate a Palestinian state, calling it a jihadist entity. This was a public confession. This was the moment they finally admitted that the two-state solution, the foundational myth of American foreign policy for over 70 years, has always been a lie. They have vetoed the entire world. And their message is clear: Gaza is only phase one. Once the population has been sufficiently thinned and expelled, the same model will be applied to the West Bank. The settlements will be formally annexed, and the remaining Palestinian population will be squeezed and pushed east, into Jordan, until the dream of Eretz Yisrael, a Jewish state from the river to the sea, is a hard, concrete reality. And it is here that the chessboard opens up, and we see the crown jewel of the entire imperial project. For years, the ultimate goal of Israeli and American diplomacy, a project personally overseen by Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, has been to secure the recognition of Israel by the great power of the Arab world, Saudi Arabia. The Abraham Accords, which brought in minor Gulf states, were merely the appetizer. The Saudis were always the main course. But there was always one hang-up. The Saudis, as the ostensible patrons of the Palestinian cause, always had one non-negotiable condition for a deal: a credible, guaranteed pathway to a Palestinian state. As long as that was a requirement, a final deal was impossible. Do you now see the diabolical brilliance of their plan? The Gaza war, and the subsequent annexation of all Palestinian land, is not an obstacle to a deal with Saudi Arabia. It is the precondition for it. By physically erasing Palestine from the map, they are solving the Palestinian problem once and for all. They are creating a new reality on the ground, a reality where a two-state solution is no longer a political question, but a physical impossibility. And once Palestine is gone, the final barrier to a Saudi-Israeli alliance is removed. And what comes after that alliance? Benjamin Netanyahu has told us himself, in an address to the United States Congress. The Abraham Accords will become the Abraham Alliance. This will be a formal, US-backed, NATO-style security pact, uniting Israel with a collection of Sunni Arab monarchies. This is the grand strategy. To create a new regional order, a new Middle Eastern empire. In this new order, Israel is the undisputed hegemon. It will be the only nuclear power. It will have no peer competitors. Its old enemies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Assad in Syria, and the great prize, Iran, will have been systematically dismantled and destroyed, often using American military power. And this entire new empire will be underwritten by a formal security guarantee from the United States military. As America, exhausted and overextended, finally withdraws from the region to focus on China, we will leave behind this new Israeli empire, a regional superpower more powerful and unchecked than anyone ever thought possible. And the man who made it all happen, the man who greenlit the final bloody phase of this conquest, the man who brokered the deals and who is now enforcing the compliance of the entire Western world, is Donald Trump. This is the empire he is building. Not for America, but for them. This grand imperial project, this forging of a new Zionist empire in the Middle East, would be an impossible fantasy without one crucial component, the complete and total capture of the American state. Israel's ambitions are not being realized by the strength of its own arms alone. They are being realized by the power of our arms, the backing of our treasury, and the subversion of our government, a subversion championed and accelerated by the President of the United States. Donald Trump is not a reluctant partner in this endeavor. He is its most effective and enthusiastic champion. Let us be clear and dispense with the comforting myths. Donald Trump is not an America First president, he is an Israel First president, and his record is a litany of betrayals of American interests. He was the one who unilaterally shredded the Iran nuclear deal, a move that pleased Tel Aviv and directly set us on the path to the war we are facing today. He was the one who assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the architect of the very axis of resistance that Israel sought to destroy. He was the one who moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, a symbolic act that greenlit the effective annexation of the city and poured fuel on the fires of Palestinian rage. He was the one who installed his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a man steeped in the messianic, radical ideology of the Chabad-Lubavitch death cult, as the chief architect of our Middle East policy, resulting in the Abraham Accords. And now, in his second term, he is the one waging economic war on our oldest allies for daring to defy Israel's will. This is not a partisan issue. This is a deep, systemic rot that has consumed our entire political class. But Trump's unique and terrible genius is his ability to sell this foreign-first agenda to a nationalist base. He is the Trojan horse. He is the spoonful of sugar that makes the poison go down. But the subversion goes far deeper than just the White House. The old model of the Israel lobby being just AIPAC is dangerously obsolete. We are now facing a far more sophisticated, total spectrum form of institutional capture. Look to Silicon Valley. The CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, now controls the software that manages the most sensitive personal data of the American people, from the IRS to the Treasury, all while his company builds AI-driven killing tools for the Israeli military. The head of Sequoia Capital, one of the most powerful venture capital firms on earth, is an Israeli American with deep ties to their intelligence services, funding the next generation of defense and surveillance technology. They are not just influencing our technology sector, they are fusing it with the Israeli military-industrial complex. Look to our universities. Trump is now using the full financial power of the federal government to blackmail our most elite institutions, like Columbia and Harvard. He is forcing them to hire pro-Israel monitors, to rewrite their Middle Eastern studies curriculum to be more favorable to Israel, and to brutally crush any pro-Palestine student protest. They are not just influencing academia, they are seizing control of the very institutions that produce our future leaders, ensuring that for the next 50 years, no one who passes through those halls will ever hear a critical word about the Zionist state. Finance, military, data, intelligence, academia, and the White House, the tentacles of this influence are wrapped around every pillar of American power. Do you now see the big picture? Do you see why the establishment is now in a controlled retreat, suddenly allowing polite criticism of foreign aid? It is a distraction. They are sacrificing a pawn to protect the king. They will let you complain about the $4 billion in aid, a meaningless pittance, as long as you do not look at the trillions of dollars in value being generated by the military, financial, and technological empire they are building on the back of the United States. This is the whole as opposed to the parts. This is the terrifying, interconnected reality. And in the face of it, we are told that our only choice is a president who is the project's chief enforcer. The great trick, the final dissection, is to keep your eyes focused on the daily battles, the petty dramas, the chosen villains. But if you zoom out, if you follow the money, if you follow the lines of influence, if you have the courage to see what is happening not as a series of coincidences but as a coordinated strategy, you will find more and more evidence of this terrifying truth. This is the situation. A global rebellion against a brutal imperial project has begun. But the empire has an enforcer. And that enforcer sits in the Oval Office, waving an American flag, while using American power to serve a foreign master. We have been had. Our government has been subverted, our economy has been weaponized, and our destiny is no longer our own.